Welcome to the HIT Podcast, HIT, Human Resources, Insurance, and Technology. I'm your host, Toby Kennedy. As we do every week, we are dropping into your feed with what I hope are bite-sized, digestible, well-curated conversations going on in the space. This week's episode will be absolutely no exception. If you are audio only and you can't see I'm smiling from ear to ear, I assure you, I'm smiling from ear to ear. This week's episode is brought to you by Montage Insurance Solutions. And without any further ado, I get into a guest that I am... See, now you gotta be careful, right? I'm about to say more excited than it's like, I don't want to degrade any of the other amazing guests we've had on, but I am like over the freaking moon. Spencer Smith, the man, the myth, the legend. God bless you. Thank you for joining my podcast, sir.
Well, thanks for building me up and making me feel special, man. Really appreciate the invite. I was just telling you that I really enjoy being a guest. I rarely get to be a guest, and you have an awesome podcast, man. And so very grateful for the invite today, and grateful we wore the same shirt as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, I appreciate the wives ringing each other, and as they dressed us on our way out the door, they gave us the same pomade, beer trimmer, and shirt. So this is perfect. This is great.
I don't even know what you call my color, but it was like one of those things where it's hanging up in your closet. And I think it was obvious. My wife was like, hey, you should wear this. And she just bought it for me. So I understood the assignment and put it on, man. And here we are.
Listen, I real recognize real. You look good, buddy. You look good. It's a good looking shirt. She was right. Yeah, good. When you say you rarely get to be a guest, I guess to back this up for the audience, you're saying that because you run your own, and these are my words, not yours, because I don't want you to have to brag yourself, incredibly successful podcast. Like, you are, honest to God, the name in healthcare podcasting. You are someone I listen to every day of my life, and I gather meaningful information from. So that's what you mean by not being able to be a guest as often. It's because you're a host so often. But let me back up and let me ask you, like, can you just give me kind of like, give me the 10-cent tour? Who's Spencer Smith? You let the audience get to know you a little bit if they are not already familiar with Self-Funded with Spencer, a podcast I full-heartedly endorse.
Sweet. Well, all right, man. Well, I appreciate this. Resounding endorsement. You know, the boring part is I've been in the insurance world for 15 plus years, right? And most people perceive that as sort of uninteresting, but I would say I've carved out a niche of something that I do find fascinating, which is this world of self-insurance and, you know, what employers can do to really take back control of their healthcare spend. And by extension, about 5 years ago, I started a podcast, actually started whiteboarding stop loss insurance first, and then got into the podcast game. And it's taken on a life of its own, man. I mean, we're already plotting the 250th episode release early next year and what we're going to do for that. And, you know, it's created an identity for me and all these things that you probably experienced as well, where you get recognized, you get invited to do stuff, you get access to folks you wouldn't have otherwise had. And it's one of those things, if I like put a point in my career, there's a before the podcast and there's an after the podcast. It's very clear the trajectory I'm on after the podcast, which I'm super grateful for.
Yeah. And again, I don't mean to belabor this, and we'll get into some actual content for everybody listening, but it's because what you bring every day is deep wisdom that you're very generous with, a great knowledge. And it's just one of those things to where when the internet's doing its job, things that are free and super valuable should bubble to the top. And you really, really know your stuff and you make it widely available. And candidly, when you touch upon your whiteboarding and also in your podcasting, it's because you make it consumable, right? So I think the idea of insurance in general is complicated for people. And then when you complicate it further by saying, hey, you know how that insurance stuff that you thought was complicated when all you did was hand over money and kind of close your eyes to the care? How about we disassemble the whole thing and you rebuild it together with me? And I go, now it's even more complicated, right? So I think that making it understandable to folks that candidly, based on their job, would benefit from understanding it better is highly appreciated.
Well, thanks, man. And the general thesis is this, right? Like, if you remove the barrier to entry to understand what we do, which is the language that we use, the jargon that really causes a lot of people to perceive what we do as very complex. I thought, why don't I just synthesize the complex and distill it down to the basics, make it accessible to literally anybody. You can start in my very first video and never heard of stop loss insurance before. Start there and build from that foundation. And I thought a rising tide will lift all boats. And so let me just be the guy that fills the void, teaching people this stuff that nobody taught me. I had to learn as I go. Yeah. And I found there's actually an audience, a bigger audience than I anticipated, that wants that type of information. And so here I am on this path, and, you know, here I am on your show as a result of it. Super cool.
Yeah. And I think that's enough on the insurance piece. If we talk about hard rock, I think going forward, that would be
metal. No, metal. Not even hard rock. We got to talk metal.
We got to
We'll save
talk
that for
metal.
the end because you'll run everybody off, I'm sure.
That's good. Yeah. So if we didn't drill our niche down enough, we're gonna now drill it down even further.
Yeah.
No, I'm just teasing that, but I do know from your podcast that you're well versed in more topics than just insurance, sir.
Yep. True.
Um, so I've discussed self-funding on this podcast before. Actually, episodes 107, 108, and 109 was the 60-minute talk that I gave from the main stage of this huge California HR conference. It's the CAHR, and shout out Rafa Rivera and the Pyro folks that put that on. But like, couple thousand attendees and a bunch of people streaming. And I was on the main stage, last speaker, keynote, and they said, just talk about insurance, Toby. So I did the 60-minute dive that if anyone, missed those episodes, go back and check those. We've also touched on self-funding quite a bit throughout kind of the arc of the show as we move around to different topics that I hope are interesting to you, the audience, and the HR folks. One thing that I think is really important in the self-funded world is the stop loss contracts. And I want to open with you on that. But what I'd like to do is maybe give the audience a quick kind of high level and have you fill in anywhere that I might have left off. And then we can kind of dive down that rabbit hole, if that's okay.
Yeah, sounds good. Do you want to start with self-insurance or do you want to start with stop loss or kind of?
Well, I think what I'd like to just say to the audience is fully insured is you giving the insurance company premium, and that's kind of the end of the relationship. The insurance company owns all of the risk. That's what you're paying for. That $1 million baby, that hemophiliac, those drug costs. Sure, your members have copays and deductibles and stuff, but you're giving the risk to the insurance company. Alternatively, when you self-fund, what you kind of do at a really high level is say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Insurance Company, how about I give you a lot less money and you just let me rent your doctors and your hospital so that I have somewhere to send my members to, and then I'll own all the claims. I'll own all those rolled ankles and MRIs and, Humiras that go get filled. The point of doing that is you can wind up saving so much in premium that when you pay for your claims, you come out ahead. And that's kind of the wisdom of self-funding. But when you do that, unless you're very, 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 very large, what you typically do is say, hey, I don't mind owning the claims. That's fine. I'll buy the claims. But let's get smart about which claims I own. So how about I own my claims, but only up to such point where any individual claim, any specific claim gets to a threshold that it's too much, maybe 50,000, 100,000, right? So y'all own all my claims, but any one claimant that hits 50,000, how about I have an insurance company that just performs there? And or sometimes neither, either, both, neither, whatever. We buy something on the aggregate that says, all right, we expect claims to be a certain amount, but if they balloon way more than we expect, all of the kind of claims in aggregate, then we have this insurance that performs, right? So what I've just tried to describe is self-funding, individual stop loss, and specific stop loss for anyone that's not caught up. Otherwise, go back and watch go watch everything Spencer's ever done and you'll catch yourselves up. Because I wanted to do that as an intro and then kind of turn it over to you to say, number one, how do you explain this in layman's terms? And then number two, because of how important stop loss is, and because I have not done a deep dive, and because there is no person on God's green earth that I believe to be more equipped to do a deep dive than Spencer Smith, how about you help us understand stop loss insurance and then key provisions and some things that go on? What do you talk about when you have an opportunity to talk about this?
Well, so let's start from the beginning. And I usually like to use an analogy, and I kind of ask a question that on the surface seems like a really dumb question, but it's because you want them to arrive at an answer that is obvious, right? And so have you ever posed the question, do you use your car insurance to pay for your gas? And usually people go, no, that would be dumb, right? But in effect, with a fully insured model, you're encapsulating the entirety of your risk into an insurance premium, and you're saying insure all of it. Okay. So what would happen if you use your car insurance to pay for gas? Your premiums for your car insurance would probably quintuple, right? As a result of that. I think the same thesis holds true for health insurance, because you're saying, hey, insure my doctor's visits, my labs, my x-rays, the things that any employer can cover in the form of cash. And so what happens as a result of that? With everything being insured, you have an upward trajectory that we're experiencing right now, where 10% average inflation for medical inflation today. And so it's obvious why we're in this realm. And so if the answer is so obvious to that question, why do you as an employer insure all of those things? So instead, let's use cash. Let's use our balance sheet or a separate account. Let's use cash for the routine things we can pay for. And then let's only buy insurance at a threshold that we're uncomfortable paying for. So use the example of $50,000. I think of that as a corporate deductible. Your employees all still have their underlying deductibles. You as a corporation have your corporate deductible. You decide what that threshold is that's appropriate, that you're comfortable with. You fund everything up to that amount in cash. And then when it goes over that, your stop loss insurance kicks in. And that becomes a lot more cash flow efficient, in my opinion. And you see, and you just said it, over the course of time, you're going to realize probably pretty significant savings versus what they're
It's
accustomed
one of the
to.
expressions I use a lot because I stole it from you, because I think smart people steal from smart people, and
Yeah,
you just keep saying it, on average over time.
Yep.
On average over time.
I stole that from a very smart person called Dave Ross.
There we go.
He said it all the time, and it's
Someone patch Nate and see who he stole it from.
yeah, he probably stole from somebody else. But the funny thing is, most people perceive, oh, I go self-insured, I automatically save money. The reality is, in any given 12-month period, that is not a guarantee. But on average, over time, to repeat the phrase, it is a very high probability that that is going to be the outcome for an employer.
So that's a little bit about how you describe stop loss, which I think is great. And if I can maybe tease that out, that almost sounded a lot like specific stop loss.
You did? Yep.
How do you talk about the sleep at night insurance?
Yeah. So the reason we focus so much on specific stop loss, which is that individual corporate threshold, is because that's where the majority of the premium is going to when you buy that insurance. And it's the most volatile of the two. And so you'll see 90% of your stop loss premium go towards specific, and the other 5, sometimes 10% will go towards aggregate insurance, which is your sleep at night insurance. And so that is the totality of claims underneath whatever specific deductible you pick. And then the carrier will add a margin of expected of 25% usually on top and say, worst case scenario, you have the worst year you could possibly imagine. Your aggregate insurance will kick in over here. And it usually only kicks in maybe 1 to 2% of the time, on average as well. So that's why it's sleep at night. It's cheap and it's very unlikely to be used, but it gives you a barometer to say, if I budget for a worst case scenario, I know the maximum amount I will spend as an employer in a given 12-month period.
And so when you say it happens 1 to 2% of the time, that's around the same figure I've seen, which if we wanted to translate that into good years and bad years, if it's happening, call it about 2% of the time, that means 1 year in 50, right? So you as an employer may very well go 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down your self-funded journey without ever triggering an aggregate stop loss claim. That wouldn't be uncommon.
Well, and let me add a layer to that. The longer you self-insure, the more predictable that number becomes.
Sure.
And the larger the employer is, you even see those jumbos drop aggregate insurance because they go, we don't need to pay for this. We got plenty of cash and we've had 10 years of experience.
Yeah.
There's no reason to even pay for this aggregate insurance anymore.
And I contrast that with specific stop loss, where I think I saw a Sun Life number, and you probably have much better data, but something like 80% of policyholders will have at least one claim, right?
Yeah, we actually try to set the spec deductible. We're looking at incidence rate, which is how many claims over the stop loss, the spec stop loss. And usually we target somewhere between 1 to 2 spec hits on that level, because like you said, 80% of those policies do have one. You don't necessarily always want to avoid a spec hit, because that probably means you have way too high of a threshold.
Right.
You buy that insurance for a reason. You also don't want 10 spec hits in a year, which would mean your deductible is likely too low. You will never get it exactly right, but you're predicting probably around 1 to 2 claims per year that are going to go over that threshold.
So to put a button on the things we're talking about, most employers that self-fund will have both individual or specific stop loss and aggregate stop loss. And most employers will probably never see an aggregate stop loss hit, and most employers will see an annual spec hit, if not more than one.
Sure, that's correct.
Okay, so when we talk about that, it's kind of why in your initial definition, you focused a little bit more on specific stop loss, because it is the one that not only, well, I guess when you talk about premium and risk, those two are so tied together. It drives so much of the premium because it carries so much of the risk. In other words, it happens a bunch, it costs a bunch. It's the lion's share of the conversation. And within that specific stop loss contract, it can be written 6 ways to Sunday, and it can be more valuable or less valuable? So far, we've touched on deductibles, and I really like the way you're framing it, because what you're trying to say is if you didn't have any specific deductible hits, what it means is you didn't have any claimants that were a high enough claimant to hit this high threshold you set. In other words, perhaps you set a threshold so high you were carrying an undue amount of risk.
Correct. Yep.
If the inverse is true and you had a ton of hits on your specific stop loss, you might have set it so low that all these little claims are pinging off of it, and you might be paying premium for too much insurance. You don't
Well, and
need
keep in
that
mind
much.
too, yeah. So not only that, the premium and the deductible level have an inverse relationship. So
Right.
the lower the spec, the more premium. So you're overpaying for premium. You're having too many claims.
That's what I mean. You've
on
dropped
average.
your specs so
Yeah.
low
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you've bumped your premium so high. So in one case you're carrying undue risk, in other case you're paying an undue too much amount in premium out. So you want to find that kind of middle ground. I have heard you talk a multitude of times, and I say the same thing about aligned incentives and finding people in the room that want what you want and don't even have, whether it's a true ulterior motive or even a potential ulterior motive, they are truly there singing from the same page, chapter, and verse as you are. And that's where I love an independent actuary, a third-party actuary, helping look at this stuff to set specific deductible amounts. It is a math. It's not just what did we do last year. It's not just what do other people in my industry do. It's looking at your specific group and finding the right threshold. And I just wonder if you can touch a little bit upon not only, finding the right threshold, but also how that might change over a year, right? How year over year we might need to look at that stuff with leverage trend, for example.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's always attracted me to stop loss insurance is that it is never an exact science. There's always an element of creativity and almost artistry to picking the right deductible level, because we're in the business of risk. Risk can be wildly unpredictable. Don't forget, specific stop loss has literally no cap. So you could have one single $10 million claim. That insurance carrier is going to reimburse everything over that deductible. So they're pricing for those things as well. We're all trying to figure out an aggregate using the law of large numbers, a profitable level that's reasonable to price this risk at, but it's very difficult to do on an individual level. So to use the, kind of suggestion that you had, you're going to typically see employers over time raise their specific deductible. One, because they grow, so the business is thriving, they're adding more employees. There is a relationship between the number of people and where your deductible should be. And then leverage trend, which I don't know if you want me to define, but leverage trend is something that's putting an outdue impact on the stop loss carrier's risk over time. And so raising that deductible helps you from having too much premium creep where you start to overpay for your stop loss if you kept it level for multiple years in a row. And so that is the art form. And that's where a great consultant is so freaking important. And I know I'm tooting your horn here, but this is why hiring the right person that's sitting on the right side of the table with you, helping you make those decisions, that person is worth their weight in gold.
Well, beep, beep, and thank you, buddy.
Yeah.
So when we talk about how important stop loss is, it's because when you self-insure, yeah, a lot of your money will be going to claims. And you tell me, maybe, I don't know, 60, 65, 70%, call it 2/3, but a good third of your money will be in fixed costs. And a good part of that is the specific stop loss. So it is a major part of your healthcare spend. And as I teased a moment ago, it can perform much better or much worse for you. And as an expert on contract language, can I ask you to maybe let us go down? Well, I know we're going down rabbit holes and we're getting kind of into the weeds, but it's why I love picking the brain of someone that's so well versed in this. What are a few stop loss contract provisions that you see can kind of be included or excluded, or they can go one way or the other? And in your opinion, it's meaningful to highlight them and it's meaningful to educate folks on how these could be best executed.
So first caveat, not a lawyer, so don't trust me on contract analysis necessarily. But the provisions that I think you should think about, there's a few that come to mind that are very...
I'm going to put a lower third in there that says actually he is a lawyer, just what it says underneath there.
I'll be sued for some sort of malpractice. But ultimately, I think there's a few that come to mind. What I will say before I even answer your question is you can buy cheap stop loss insurance, and a lot of people purchase it because a spreadsheet was presented to them and they picked the cheapest option. What we know that cheap often is much more expensive over the long haul. And so then you have to start asking the question, what's in my contract? What are the provisions? So the first two that are usually hand in hand are no new laser provisions and rate caps. And so I'll define each real quick and say why they come together. No new laser simply means at renewal time, that insurance carrier cannot place a laser, which is a large named deductible on an individual or multiple individuals because they have long-term ongoing risk. Okay. So what could happen as an example is you could hire a hemophiliac third month in the policy. They cost you $1 million a year. The carrier comes back to you and says, we have to put a laser on that person for $1 million. Sorry, because you didn't buy a no new laser at renewal provision.
I think this is worth like just pausing on this and saying, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Employer out there that didn't know this was a possibility. If you don't know your contract's language surrounding lasers, you might think you have insurance that will perform at $50,000 to keep our example consistent. You might find at renewal that they say, yeah, you're right. It's $50,000 for everyone. Well, not John. For John, it's $1 million. Yeah. And you go, what? All of a sudden I'm on the hook for $1 million for this one guy? And they go, yep, because he has a lot in claims and you don't have a provision in your contract surrounding lasers. So we're going to get laser focused on that guy and you're going to own the bill.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it's going to add $1 million-ish, right, to your total exposure. It doesn't guarantee that that person will still be on the plan or won't get better. But then it adds this extra layer of exposure for an employer because you didn't purchase the right contract at the front end. These are very common, by the way. I would, as a standard, almost always ask for a no new laser provision. But a no new laser is not that valuable if you don't add a rate cap. So if I had a no new laser without a rate cap, my carrier could come back and say, well, I can't laser, but here's your 200% increase to premium, right?
And you're not being silly when you say that number. In stop loss world, you can get triple digit increases.
Oh yeah, I saw earlier this year, we saw an 83% increase where multiple lasers and an exclusion were added at renewal, which is basically saying that person has no coverage whatsoever, no matter how bad it is, right? Yeah. So those things can and do happen. The other side of that is a rate cap. So a rate cap is simply saying of the portion of your spend that's now stop loss insurance, we will not increase that portion above X. So in our example with Pareto, it's the standard is 30%. The norm in the industry is 50%. So you combine those two together, you now have compression on the exposure you have for claims, and you have compression on what is the actual premium increase I can receive in a given 12-month period. Those are the two provisions I would absolutely start with.
And within that explanation, you just name-checked Pareto, who I will get into in a moment. And I didn't really define your role. You work for a captive, and we'll get into what a captive is in a moment, but you work for the nation's largest captive. And Pareto, because of that size and scale, is able to do some things that not everybody's able to do out there. And I think that that's awesome. And I just want to kind of tease for the audience that we intend to dive down the rabbit hole of captives in a moment. And that is kind of, if you're wondering why Toby and Spencer are in the same room, it's like, are you both consultants or who are you or whatever? No, Spencer works for a captive who's someone that, we represent. And this is all they do all day and twice on Sundays. So that's who Pareto is and that's who Spencer is. No new lasers, rate cap. Give me kind of one or two more really important stop loss provisions.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that people miss because if you were to spreadsheet those things again, you're just shopping stop loss. You're probably going to have a line that says no new laser, yes. You're going to have a line that says rate cap 50% or 55%. Those would typically be on there. But then you get into things like plan mirroring and spec advance. So let me define what both of those are. Plan mirroring is saying whatever contractual language my stop loss policy says is covered is going to mirror what my plan document. Think of that as like the living, breathing Bible, if you will, for your plan of what is eligible to be paid. You as a plan sponsor will set what those things are, usually along with your TPA. Mirroring says policy and plan document mirror one another and agree of the things that are covered. Because if you don't do that, Stop loss policy might deny something that your plan document says is covered, or the inverse could be true. And ultimately, you as an employer now have a gap in coverage and you're exposed to that particular risk. Plan mirroring rarely shows up on a spreadsheet. And these are the things, obviously, you're hired to make sure are in there. But I would work with a stop loss carrier that is offering that plan mirroring provision. Otherwise, you could get caught blindsided, unfortunately.
Yeah, the point is it's a $100,000, $200,000, $400,000 claim, and you think, why am I paying this? I thought I had a $50,000 spec. And they go, yeah, well, the stop loss doesn't perform on this type of a claim. And you go, why? It's covered on the insurance. You go, well, stop loss doesn't think it's covered because we didn't mirror the language.
Exactly. And then the other thing is spec advance, which is pretty common. Sometimes you'll hear advance reimbursement, simultaneous reimbursement. They all mean the same thing. But you can imagine an employer that has that $50,000 deductible we keep talking about and has $1 million claim. Stop loss insurance is a reimbursement insurance. So you would pay for it first, get reimbursed by the stop loss carrier when they prove it's eligible. If you don't have spec advance, you might be waiting months. You're paying $1 million up front to get $950,000 back later. What spec advance does is say, hey, hold on. We know there's a big claim out there. Let's pen that claim as a TPA. Let's send it to the stop loss carrier for review. If they prove initially it's eligible, boom, you're getting that $950,000 back either simultaneously or typically within a few business days.
And it sounds like we're in the weeds here, but a major factor / hurdle / headwind to self-insuring, especially your grandma's self-insurance, was cash flow. An employer saying, buddy, I don't have the ability to fork this out and get paid back way later. It constricts my cash flow in ways that are prohibitive to the way we do business. And so these types of contract languages have evolved over time to say to that employer, fundamentally, we're talking about the transfer of risk. If the cash flow is your issue, here's some provisions that should smooth a lot of that stuff out.
Absolutely. And then the last one I'll touch on, and I don't want to lose the audience because we're doing all these like niche.
No. I don't care about the audience anymore. This is just me and you talking. I'm not even going to hear this.
Is anybody even listening now? Let's just you and I talk. The aggregate accommodation, which you obviously know, that's the last thing when you're thinking about cash flow. Very important for smaller groups, especially captive type groups that want to self-fund. Aggregate accommodation says, hey, rather than waiting till the end of the year to find out you've breached your ag attachment point and getting money back, we're going to track that on a monthly basis. And at any point during that year, if your monthly cumulative total claims go above that number, we're going to give you money back. So sometimes the TPA does it, sometimes the stop loss carrier does it, but they're going to reimburse in real time as that breach happens, rather than waiting for the reconciliation or the end of the contract in order to make sure.
Right. So let's say it's a plan year that runs concurrent with the calendar year. When you're in January, if you're 1/12 of your way onto that aggregate number, when you're in March, you're 3/12 of your way towards that aggregate number. We will say, look, you've already hit a ceiling that goes kind of on a step scale across the calendar year, and we'll go ahead and just reimburse along the way. So that, as you mentioned, you're not going to pay, and then somewhere in December, someone goes, man, you really blew through a lot of that. At some point in the future, we should pay you back for a lot of that, right? And so it goes hand in glove with what you said earlier from a cash flow standpoint. And I love being able to pick your brain about these contract provisions. And I think it is an episode that anyone that thinks about self-insuring, that is self-insuring, like, give this X amount, whatever it is, 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes of your time, because these contract provisions are so important. That's all the time we have for you this week. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our sponsors, Rula, Excel Health, TrueHue, guys that keep the lights on, Montage Insurance Solutions. We are blessed to be here. This is part 1 of a 3-part series. So tune in next week and the week after to get to the conclusion of my conversation with Spencer Smith. Join us next week. Join us every week. And until next week, make this the best week yet.